Bibliophiles of the internet, we are about halfway through the year, which means it's about time I wrecked your TBRs even more by sharing some upcoming 2025 and 2026 releases. And because it's still Pride Month, and because we read queer all year round in these parts, all of these books are queer 2025 or 2026 releases. These are in chronological order, by the way, so let's just dive into some of the saved announcements I have on Instagram, starting with the graphic novel Simplicity by Maddie Lubchansky. This comes out on July 29th from Pantheon Books. It's set in 2081 after New York City has separated from the United States and become its own walled-off, almost dystopian territory. The main character, Lucius, is a trans man who's hired to complete an anthropological survey of a cult that went off into the Catskills and took over an abandoned summer camp back in the 1970s. And even though Lucius is very wary about this group of people, he finds himself intrigued and especially charmed by his guide named Amity. But the longer he stays in this camp, the more he begins to suffer visions of incredibly beautiful but nightmarish creatures. Then, of course, we have Adib Khorram's next adult romance, It Had to Be Him, which comes out from Forever Books on September 2nd. This is about two former classmates, Ramin and Noah, who are unexpectedly reunited when they're both traveling abroad. Ramin was actually dumped after proposing to his ex, who broke off the relationship because he claimed Ramin was too boring. So Ramin responds by booking a spontaneous trip to Italy, where he happens to run into his high school crush. I'm sure many of you already know about this next release, but I'm gonna mention it anyways. That is You Weren't Meant to Be Human by Andrew Joseph White, which comes out on September 9th from Saga Press. This is Andrew's adult horror debut. The story is following a trans-autistic man named Crane who lives in a future Appalachia where masses of worms and flies have taken over the landscape. And in exchange for unwavering loyalty and fresh corpses, these hives offer struggling humans a strange kind of salvation. Crane is actually grateful to be controlled by these creatures because they give him a safe place to transition, to be himself, to never speak again, and he even falls in love with a man named Levi. But when Levi gets Crane pregnant, the hive demands that he see the pregnancy through, no matter the cost. Andrew has described this as his most disgusting, disturbing, gross horror story to date. I, for one, believe him, and I cannot wait. On a very different note, in the realm of sapphic romance, we have Everything She Does Is Magic by Bridget Morrissey, coming out on September 9th from Delacorte Press. This is categorized as young adult on Storygraph, but I'm not entirely sure, so do not quote me on that. It's set in a small town where every day is Halloween. The main character, Darcy, I believe is human, but her parents have cultivated this Halloween empire in town, and they want her to continue the family business. Then there's a new girl in town named Anya, who is a real-life witch, and she can only complete her initiation into her coven by appointing a mortal ally to act as her protector. But because she doesn't actually know anyone in town, she lies and tells her coven that Darcy, her secret crush, has agreed to do the job, and shenanigans ensue. This just sounds like a really cute forced proximity sapphic romance with tons of fall ambiance with things like costume parades and pumpkin patches. I am a very stereotypical October baby, so I am very interested. On yet another completely different note, I'm also incredibly excited for Ryan LaSala's next weird queer horror story, and that is The Dead of Summer, which comes out on September 16th from Scholastic. This is supposed to be like oceanic horror. It's following a character named Ollie who is finally returning back home to an island known as Anchor's Mercy after spending a year away while his mother went through cancer treatment. The good news is that she's now cancer-free and determined for them to have the best summer ever. But Ollie's ex-friends aren't exactly willing to pick up where they left off. And he also gets the feeling that this picture-perfect island is actually hiding some sinister secrets. Secrets that might just explain his mom's illness, and the illness of so many other locals. If you know anything about me, you know I love the Sworn Soldier series, and we finally have a cover and release date for the third novella in the series, What Stalks the Deep by T. Kingfisher, coming out from Tor Nightfire on September 30th. This is a horror novella once again following Alex Easton, a non-binary former soldier who is visiting America in this installment. Specifically, Alex is going to investigate a coal mine in West Virginia that has a reputation for being haunted. But even though Ka does not want to be there, Ka's old friend Dr. Denton begs Alex to help find his disappeared cousin, who vanished in that very same mine without a trace. Next is perhaps the most recent announcement I've seen, and that was for Between the Walls by Caspian Faye, which is coming out on September 30th from Tiny Ghost Press. Press. This is a queer paranormal horror/romance story about a teenager named James who was relocated after his parents' divorce, and he is deeply unimpressed not only about having to move, but also with the strange occurrences keeping him awake in their new house. But then he discovers Nathaniel, the ghost of a trans boy who lives in his walls. But as the two of them learn more about each other and grow closer, they realize there is a much darker entity occupying the house that threatens to tear them apart. Everything about this is exactly my brand, and I cannot wait. Circling back to exciting releases from Tor, we can also expect the novella Cinderhouse by Freya Marski from Tor.com on October 7th. This is a retelling of Cinderella described as a queer gothic romance. It's about a girl named Ella who was murdered at the age of 16, and now her ghost is forever trapped in her father's house, and she is invisible to everyone except for her stepmother and stepsisters. She does find a way to temporarily free herself from her spectral prison, but she has to make sure that no one finds out, and every night at the stroke of midnight, no matter where she is returned to the staircase where she was killed. One day she makes a bargain with a fairy charm seller for 3 nights of almost living freedom, where she can finally be seen and heard, and she has to try to use those 3 days to somehow change her fate. I'm also very intrigued by All of Us Murderers by KJ Charles, which also comes out on October 7th from Poison Pen Press. This is a blend of gothic mystery, horror, and romance. It's about a character named Zeb who was summoned to a wealthy relative's remote gothic manor, where he finds all the people he least wants to see: his estranged brother, his loathsome cousins, and his bitter ex-lover Gideon Grey. Then the patriarch of the house announces the true purpose behind this gathering, which is that he intends to leave the huge family fortune to whichever man marries cousin Jessamine. Zeb could not be less interested in this farce and immediately tries to leave, only to realize that they have been trapped. The walls are high, the gates are locked, and it's impossible to see even a foot in front of you when the mists roll in. And to make things worse, there might be something else trapped with them in the house. Julie Leong also has a sapphic cozy fantasy coming out called The Keeper of Magical Things, which will be out on October 14th from Ace Books. I think this might be set in the same world as The Teller of Small Fortunes, which is also on my TBR. It's about a magic user named Certainty who just wants to use her magic to help the people around her, but she only has a very tepid form of magic that hasn't proven to be very much use. So when she hears about a chance to officially obtain her magehood via a straightforward assessment, she decides to do it, even if it means having to work alongside Mage Aurelia, an overachiever who is unfairly brilliant and unfairly attractive. A somewhat underrated upcoming release that I'm super excited about is When They Burned the Butterfly by Wenyi Li, coming out from Tor Books on October 21st. This is pitched as Silvia Moreno Garcia meets Fonda Lee. Can we just take a moment to let the power of those two names really sink in? It's a historical fantasy story set in Singapore during the 1970s when the country is newly independent, and gangsters are actually the last conduits of the gods that their immigrant ancestors brought with them to the country. The main character, Adeline, has the ability to summon flames on her fingertips and doesn't know whether other people like her exist. But when her mother tragically dies in a house fire and Adeline finds a butterfly seared onto her skin, she begins to hunt down a girl she saw in a back alley bar fight who she noticed has a similar butterfly tattoo, and by doing so discovers that she is far from alone. Switching gears to YA, Lila Lee is finally returning to YA with The Cuffing Game, which comes out from Harper Teen on November 18th. Lila usually has bisexual rep in her books, so I assume that's also the case for this release. It's supposed to be a YA K-drama remix of Pride and Prejudice if the characters of Pride and Prejudice were on a reality dating show. The story follows a young college student named Mia who not only got a full scholarship to her dream school, but is already producing her own dating show starring her classmates and their crushes. But things go off the rails when she has to enlist the help of her own secret crush, Noah, and convince him to join the show as a contestant. We also have a new YA release from a powerhouse author duo to look forward to, and that is There's Always Next Year by George M. Johnson and Leah Johnson, coming out on December 2nd from Fierce Reads. This is described as a dual POV double love story following two teenagers as a new year begins. One of the characters, Andy, had an absolutely horrific New Year's Eve, and now she only has the first day of the year to to fix everything that went wrong, to stop the gentrification threatening her family's business, and to figure out her confusing feelings for the new girl next door. Dominic, the other main POV character, is an influencer on the verge of securing a major brand deal that could very well change his and his family's lives. But then he gets sidetracked when he runs into a former best friend, and unresolved feelings begin to emerge. I have no idea where this story is going to go or how these storylines are going to overlap, but it also kind of doesn't matter because both Leah and George are incredible authors within their own right, and I think when they put their talent together, they're going to make something super special. Moving on to early 2026, on the middle grade side of things, we can also look forward to Brady Mason's Perfect Fit by Nicole Melleby, coming out from Little Brown Books for Young Readers on January 13th. This is about a sports-obsessed foster kid named Brady who cannot care less about things like fashion and clothes and appearances. But when her friends notice that she kind of looks like a famous fashion editor, Elena Levine, they decide to make a few videos about it online, joking that Brady is her long-lost daughter, just to get some likes. But then a DNA test confirms that Brady is actually Elena's long-lost daughter, and suddenly she finds herself whisked away to Manhattan to live with Elena and see if they can figure out how to be a family. Then we have another adult romance from Julian Winters to look forward to, and that is Last First Kiss, coming out from St. Martin's Griffin on January 27th. This is a second chance rom-com about Jordan Carter, who works at his family's event planning business, and his boss assigns him to plan a new client's high-profile wedding where the man of honor is not only the same guy that Jordan unsuccessfully tried to hook up with the year before, but also his first kiss. Julian's adult romance debut, I Think They Love You, was so incredibly lovely, and I think this is also going to be fantastic. We also very recently finally got a cover and release date for the sequel to Shape a Dragon's Breath, that is To Ride a Rising Storm by Monocle Blackgoose, coming out from Del Rey on January 27th. Obviously, this is a sequel, so I'm not going to say too much, but it's an indigenous fantasy story once again following the main character, Anakus, during her summer break from the academy, where she and her dragon are headed back to her homeland along with Theod, the only other native student. But what should be a restorative and relaxing break takes a much darker turn when she realizes there is an English presence on Mascapog for the first time in generations, thanks in part to her own notoriety. To Shape a Dragon's Breath is just a phenomenal fantasy, and trust me when I say I am counting down the days to this next installment. We also recently got a cover for Kristen Randall's next book, According to Plan, which comes out on February 3rd from Simon Teen. This is a YA coming-of-age story and romance about Mal, who is the editor for their school's literary magazine. And they just want to stick to their plan of running the magazine as usual so they can just make it to graduation and get out of their small Midwestern town. But because of budget cuts, the Lit Mag actually gets canceled, and now Mal is scrambling to find another sort of activity that will look just as good on their college apps. That's when Emerson comes in, who suggests that the magazine staff goes rogue and creates a zine instead, which Mal thinks is a cool idea, but they're also kind of worried about how making and selling contraband art isn't exactly something they can put on their resume. But maybe they have to ditch their carefully curated plans in order to finally find happiness. I'm also very intrigued by Andrea Tang's next book, To the Death, which comes out from Penguin Teen on February 10th. This is a fantasy story about a teenager named Samantha who only wants one thing, and that is to exact revenge for her brother's death after he was killed in an illegal magical duel. Ever since then, she's been training with an official dueling champion named Lysander and biding her time until she can finally take down her brother's killer, Matthias Blackwood. Tamsin, on the other hand, wants to finally make a name for herself in the magical dueling circuit and jumps at the challenge from Lysander and Sam to duel, if only so she can finally separate herself from the shadow of her father and coach, Matthias. I'm a huge fan of the Remix Classic series from Macmillan, and we are finally getting a trans femme remix of Dorian Gray called This Wretched Beauty by Elle Grenier, coming out on February 17th from Fywell and Friends. I almost don't want to say anything else, but this is set in London during the 1800s and follows Dorian, who is the heir to a title and their family's estate, but they also don't feel like they're living a life that they've chosen for themselves. One night, they sneak out of their grandfather's house and they meet a talented young painter named Basil, who immediately sees Dorian as his muse. And he paints a portrait of Dorian that exposes an uncanny and deeply intimate likeness, unlike anything Dorian has seen before. And of course, this is not intended as a definitive nor exhaustive list of upcoming queer releases, but the last upcoming queer release I'll share for today is Nobody's Baby by Olivia Waite, which comes out from Tor.com on March 10th. This is the sequel to Murder by Memory, a queer, cozy sci-fi mystery, and it's once again following Dorothy Gentleman, who lives aboard a generation ship called the HMS Fairweather and works as a detective on the ship. In this book, an infant is mysteriously left on her nephew's doorstep, even though fertility is supposed to be on pause for the duration of the Fairweather's journey. So the question is, who produced this child, why did they abandon him, and why did they choose Dorothy's nephew and his husband as potential caretakers? I read and really enjoyed Murder by Memory during the December round of the Queer Lit Readathon and have been eagerly awaiting any news about the next installments. You know me, I just cannot say no to a good, cozy, sapphic mystery in space. So those are some upcoming queer releases to last you through about the next 9 months, give or take. There's a lot to look forward to and so many exciting queer books releasing literally all the time. If any of these are on your radar, let me know, or feel free to share some of your own anticipated queer releases down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself and others, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.